The Arizona dawn rose slow and red over the desert as Clara Whitten clung to the splintered edge of a broken wagon board. Her breath shook through her ribs like a trapped bird, and her skirts were torn from running through sage and dust. The world felt strangely silent after the chaos of the ambush. Only the far cry of a hawk and the hiss of desert wind remained. Yet she sensed she was not alone. Hoofbeats rolled over the hard earth. A line of Apache riders appeared like shadows taking shape. From the rising sun, their paint-streaked faces and the sharp glint of their weapons added a fierce authority to the morning light. Clara backed away, step after step, until her boots touched the scorched side of the ruined wagon. She wanted to stand. Tall, but fear gnawed at her spine. The leader dismounted first. He moved with a steady, controlled grace, his skin bronzed by countless days beneath the sun, his long hair tied with braided leather, his eyes dark, steady, unreadable. This was no ordinary warrior. This was Takoda, newly chosen chief of his people. His presence made the other men hold still, as if waiting for his breath to guide theirs. Takoda looked at Clara in a way that made the air around her feel warm and heavy, though she had been raised to fear Apache warriors. Something in his gaze was not cruel. It held strength, yes, but also a curious gentleness. His brow creased as if searching for meaning in her face. She felt the weight of that stare through her whole body. One of the younger warriors lifted his bow toward her, but Takoda raised his hand and the bow lowered instantly. He stepped closer to Clara. She wanted to run, yet her legs felt rooted to the earth like old mesquite. His shadow fell over her, bringing a strange shelter from the harsh sun. Takoda spoke in his language, his voice low and deep. The words rolled like distant thunder she could not understand. A second warrior translated, saying, "The chief says you will not be harmed. His command is final." Clara let out a shaking breath she had not known she held. Warriors gathered the supplies scattered from the attack while Takoda examined the ground, the tracks, the marks of violence. Clara expected at any moment to be tied or pushed or threatened, but Takoda treated her like a fragile thing he did not know how to handle. When he gestured for her to walk, she followed, not from fear alone, but from an awareness that she was safer near him than alone in the desert. They brought her into their camp. By midday, the people stared with wide, curious eyes. Some whispered, some frowned. Others looked at Takoda as if searching for answers. Clara felt their tension like a tightening noose around her neck. Yet Takoda remained calm, every movement measured, controlled and quiet, like a mountain cat that knew its own power inside. His lodge, the air was cool, the scent of pine and smoke softening her nerves. Takoda stood across from her, his arms folded, a question in his gaze. Clara realized he was studying her not as an enemy, but as a puzzle. He spoke again through the translator, saying, "The chief asks if you are hurt." Clara shook her head and whispered, "No, I am only scared." Takoda nodded slowly, then knelt to stir the fire at the center of the lodge. His hands were steady, his breath controlled. He seemed a man shaped by discipline and duty, not wild fury. Clara felt her heartbeat begin to slow outside. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of distant voices. The tribe debated her presence. Some insisted she would bring trouble. Others claimed she was a sign from the spirits, but Takoda stood between her and every threatening voice, offering no explanation for why he protected her. Only the unspoken truth lingered in the air. He had looked at her once, and something inside him had shifted like stone, breaking open to reveal hidden fire. And as night crept toward the desert, she sensed that her fate was now bound to the chief, who had saved her in a way neither of them yet understood. Sun dipped behind the jagged line of the Arizona hills, painting the Apache camp in gold and ember light. Clara sat near the small fire inside Takoda's lodge, her hands folded in her lap, her nerves raw and trembling. Only hours had passed, but it felt as if she had stepped into an entirely different world, one where every rule she had known drifted away like dust in the wind. Takoda entered quietly, pushing aside the hide flap. His footsteps were soft yet powerful, sending a hush through the kenda. lodge he placed a bundle of fresh herbs near the fire and sat across from her. Clara kept her eyes lowered, unsure whether she should speak or wait for him. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that touched more deeply than words could reach. The translator, an older man with gentle eyes, knelt beside them. His voice carried the message that Takoda wished to share. The chief wants to understand who you are, where you come from, and whether you are alone. Clara swallowed hard and told him that she had been traveling with a wagon train heading west. That bandits had struck in the night and she had become separated in the chaos. She had nowhere left to go. Takoda listened, every muscle still as a carved figure as she spoke. Clara noticed something different in his expression, something almost hesitant. The translator cleared his throat, a little awkwardness creeping into his voice. The chief wishes you to know he has lived by a vow. He has not taken a wife, he has not touched a woman. Clara blinked, trying to understand why such a thing mattered to him, or why he would share it with her. Takoda seemed to read the confusion on her face. He lifted his hand, touching his chest, then the earth, then the fire, as if explaining a Favasana, sacred promise. The translator explained that when Takoda was chosen as a young warrior to train for leadership, he made a vow of purity until the spirits signaled the right path for him. He had walked that path many years, devoted to discipline and duty, so much so that even his own people whispered about his solitude. Clara felt an unexpected warmth rise through her cheeks. She had never imagined this fierce and commanding chief to carry a life of restraint and loneliness. His powerful presence suggested a man who lived in complete control, yet beneath that was a life untouched by simple tenderness. She began to see Takoda not as the warrior she feared, but as a man shaped by heavy expectations and quiet sacrifice. The fire crackled gently between them, casting shifting shadows upon his face. Clara dared to look into his eyes, and what she found there startled her. They were not cold or distant. Instead, they were searching, full of questions, full of a curiosity he did not know how to hide. He seemed fascinated by her in ways he did not fully understand. She could almost feel his thoughts circling her like slow, careful steps. Outside, the camp settled into night. Women sang low songs. Children drifted to sleep. Warriors sharpened their blades under the moonlight, but inside the lodge a different tension grew, not one of danger, but of discovery. Clara felt her breath hitch as Takoda leaned slightly forward, as if drawn to her without intent. His eyes lingered on her hair, her hands, her trembling shoulders. The translator spoke again, his voice soft. He says he does not know why he looks at you this way. He says you feel something new, something he cannot explain. He asked if you fear him. Clara met Takoda's gaze and shook her head. Though fear still lived in her chest, it was no longer directed at him, but at the strange new feeling that seemed to bind them. Takoda nodded once deeply, as if her answer had lifted a great weight. He stood, then walked to the far side of the lodge, placing his hand against the hide wall. His breath came slow and controlled, but the tremor in his shoulders revealed a battle within him. A chief who had never known desire was trying to understand the heat that now lived in his blood. Clara watched him, realizing that the vow he had held for years had begun to crack the moment he looked at her, and she understood that this quiet revelation was only the beginning of a fire. Neither of them was prepared to face a storm gathered over the mountains. As twilight settled across the camp, the wind carried a sharp, cold bite and the scent of coming rain. The Apache people moved quickly, securing hides, tying down belongings, guiding children into shelters. The sky rumbled with the deep rolling voice of thunder, warning all to find safety before the storm unleashed its fury. Takoda stepped into the lodge, his expression tense yet calm. His hair whipped in the rising wind as he lowered the hide flap behind him, trapping the scent of rain inside. Clara felt her heart leap at the loud crack of the first lightning strike. Outside, the world had become wild, fierce, untamed. Inside the lodge, another kind of storm waited, one that neither of them fully understood. Clara sat near the fire, her arms wrapped around herself, her dress still dusty, her hair tangled from the long day. She expected Takoda to sit far from her, as he often did, maintaining the respectful distance he held with almost sacred discipline. Instead, he moved closer, low, steady, breath guiding him like a man walking toward something inevitable. The lodge quivered under a thunderous clash of wind. Clara flinched, and Takoda noticed he crouched beside her with slow, careful motion. She could feel his warmth even without his touch. A weight in the air, thick and living, settled around them like invisible hands pressing them closer. The translator was nowhere to be seen. Having taken shelter elsewhere, Clara realized they were alone, truly alone, for the first time, without anyone to shape the words between them. Takoda studied her face with a tenderness that stole her breath. His gaze traced every line, every shadow, every tremble in her lashes. A sudden gust tore through the camp, snapping branches and rattling the very poles of the lodge. Clara gasped and instinctively reached forward. Takoda caught her hands gently. His touch was steady and warm, his rough, calloused fingers folded around her small, shaking ones. A shiver ran through her, though it was not from the storm. Takoda drew in a breath as if that simple contact lit a spark under his skin. His jaw tightened, his eyelids dropped for a moment, then he guided her hands against his chest, the place where his heart beat strong and sure. The rhythmic thrum pulsed beneath her palms. Steady yet rising, as though responding to her touch. Something shifted in him, like a boulder that had resisted time, finally giving way under pressure. His vow, his discipline, his sacred restraint, all began to crumble. Clara could see it in the way his breath changed, in the way his shoulders stiffened, as if bracing against an inner flood. He gently lifted her chin with two fingers, urging her eyes to meet his. The storm outside roared, but the one in his gaze was far stronger. Clara whispered Takoda, her voice trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming pull between them. He swallowed hard, his throat moving with visible effort. He did not need words. His body spoke louder than any voice. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to turn away, but she did not. She leaned toward him as if drawn by magnet and heat and fate. Their foreheads touched first, a soft, quiet moment like the still center of a cyclone. His breath mingled with hers, warm and unsteady. His hand moved to her cheek, cupping her face with reverence yet desire. Burned beneath the tenderness, like a man experiencing the first fierce taste of longing, he trembled against the struggle to remain controlled. Lightning split the sky, flooding the lodge with silver light. In that flash she saw everything in him. The loneliness, the hunger, the confusion, the unstoppable pull toward her, and then the last of his restraint. Shattered. Takoda wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into him with a strength that felt both protective and desperate. He held her as if he had waited his entire life for this single moment. Clara sank into him, her heart racing, her breath lost to the pounding of the storm. Inside and outside, sanctuary and danger intertwined in the heat between them. The storm raged on, but neither of them heard it anymore. For the first time in his life, Takoda allowed the fire within him to burn free, a chief who had mastered every discipline could not master this. Not her, not the feeling swelling through him like fierce wildfire. As night sealed the world in rain and thunder, he surrendered to the truth that terrified him most. He could not stop, not from holding her, not from wanting her, not from the force that drew him to her again and again with unstoppable need. The first light of dawn crept across the desert, turning the horizon soft pink and gold. Clara stirred in the lodge, her body heavy with the memory of the night before. She lay wrapped in the warmth of Takoda's arms, the scent of his skin lingering in her hair, and the quiet rhythm of his breathing pressing against her back. The world outside still slept, but inside everything had shifted. Takoda did not move at first. His arms remained around her, protective, possessive, as if letting go would mean losing a part of himself. He had spent his life disciplined, strong, unyielding. Yet last night that control had evaporated, swept away by something older and more powerful than any vow or rule. The fire that had consumed them both had left marks on his soul as well as hers. Turned slightly, her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Her hands traced the line of his shoulder, marveling at the strength that had held her safe, the intensity that had claimed her in ways she could not name. She remembered the heat, the desperate need, and the tenderness intertwined as if one could not exist without the other. The lodge was quiet. The fire was reduced to smoldering embers. The air smelled faintly of pine smoke and the lingering rain from the night before. Outside, the world seemed unaware of the storm that had raged within these walls. Only the soft rustle of a bird's wing and the distant cry of a coyote reminded them that the desert waited beyond the shelter of the lodge. Takoda shifted slightly, turning his face toward hers. His dark eyes searched hers with a mixture of awe and disbelief. It was the first time she saw him vulnerable, trembling, unsure of what the day would demand or how the tribe would respond to the change he could not hide. He had surrendered to desire and now faced the consequences of letting his humanity show. Clara whispered softly, her words almost lost in the warmth of the morning. He had held her the night before in a way that spoke of ownership and protection, yet also reverence and wonder. She had never known a man could contain so much strength and gentleness at once. Her pulse raced as she realized she could not imagine leaving this lodge, leaving him, leaving the strange unspoken bond that had formed between them. Outside, the tribe began to stir. Warriors stepped cautiously around the camp, aware of the storm's aftermath. Women emerged from shelters, their eyes on Takoda, wondering if the events of the night had left a mark on their chief. Elders spoke in hushed tones, debating what this sudden vulnerability might mean. Some feared weakness, others saw awakening. Yet none could deny that the chief had changed in ways impossible to ignore. Takoda lifted his hand, brushing a strand of hair from Clara's face. The gesture was soft, deliberate, careful. His thumb traced the line of her cheek as though memorizing every detail. He spoke through the translator, a simple acknowledgement that he had never felt so captivated by another human being, that no vow, no discipline could hold him back. Clara felt her chest tighten with emotion. She realized then that her fear had shifted to something entirely different. Not fear of him, not fear of the tribe, not fear of the unknown desert world around them, but fear of losing this fragile unspoken connection that now tethered her heart to his. Her lips parted almost unconsciously, as if seeking reassurance that he too felt the irrevocable pull. Takoda's grip tightened slightly. His gaze darkened with intensity. He seemed both startled and exhilarated by the sensation of desire intertwined with responsibility. He had faced enemies on battlefields, conquered fear in countless forms. Yet nothing had prepared him for the power of a woman's presence in his life the way Clara's courage, her vulnerability, and her warmth had undone years of rigid control. Morning light streamed across their faces, revealing every expression, every subtle flicker of emotion. She saw devotion in his eyes, longing and admiration, and the quiet promise that he would not let harm come to her. The realization settled in her chest like the slow rising sun over the desert horizon. This was a man who had surrendered his discipline yet claimed her in the most profound way. And as the camp slowly came to life around them, as voices echoed across the sands, Clara understood that nothing would ever be the same. Takoda had opened himself fully, and she had seen it. She had been captivated by his strength, his discipline, his surrender. And she knew that what had begun last night was only the first step in a story neither of them could control, but both were destined to follow. The sun climbed higher over the desert, heating the sand and the faces of the Apache camp. The morning after the storm left a strange tension hanging in the air. Clara moved carefully among the people, her steps light but watchful. Every glance she received seemed charged with questions. Some looked at her with suspicion, others with curiosity, and a few with thinly veiled resentment. She had never felt so visible and so exposed. Takoda walked beside her, his posture unyielding, his presence commanding attention wherever he went. Warriors and elders turned their eyes to him. Some whispered words she could not understand, yet the tone of each carried weight. The chief's actions last night had stirred something in the tribe. A chief who lost control was a chief who could be questioned, and the elders debated whether his obsession with the white woman would weaken him. Clara noticed the warriors exchanging glances, some muttered under their breath, voices sharp and filled with disapproval. They saw her as a threat to tradition, to the tribe's stability. Some feared that Takoda's desire for her might cloud his judgment in matters of leadership. They remembered the rules, the expectations, the years of preparation that demanded a chief remain disciplined above all else. Yet there were others who observed with softened expressions. Eyes lingered on Takoda as he moved among them, his face calm yet alert, showing the trace of last night's vulnerability. His hands brushed the hands of his people, gently giving guidance, a touch that spoke of trust and respect. Those who understood his heart saw that he had not weakened. He had awakened to something more human and more profound than any law or custom. The elders called a meeting, a council, to discuss the presence of a young woman in their midst. Clara watched from the edge of the gathering, her hands clenched lightly. She felt fear curl in her stomach, imagining that they might send her away, or worse, that Takoda might be forced to choose between her and his people. The sun beat down on the assembled group, their shadows stretching long across the sand. Takoda stood before them, his figure tall, steady, resolute. His gaze swept across the circle, each face weighed with judgment. Each warrior, each elder felt the power of his voice even before he spoke. He did not raise his hand in anger nor shout. He simply stated that Clara would remain with him, and that any who opposed this decision would answer to him. The words were simple but carried the force of iron. The tribe stirred with murmurs of shock and discontent. Some argued that no chief could allow personal desire to outweigh tradition. Others argued that the chief's choice was his alone, that the spirits and the ancestors would judge accordingly. They debated fiercely, their voices rising and falling like wind over the desert dunes. Clara felt caught between fear and awe, watching the dance of power that played out with her at the center. Takoda's eyes found hers, and a quiet understanding passed between them. A single glance carried reassurance, protection, and a promise of steadfast devotion. She felt the warmth of his presence anchor her against the storm of disapproval that swirled through the tribe. The chief had chosen her, and in that choice lay the weight of responsibility and the brilliance of love. Outside the lodge, children played quietly, and women whispered to one another. Yet even in these softer corners of the camp, the tension lingered. It was not a simple matter of keeping a woman safe. It was the question of balance between desire and duty, between personal heart and collective tradition. Clara realized that her presence had sparked more than curiosity or envy. It had challenged the very structure of the tribe and the definition of what it meant to follow a chief. As the sun dipped toward the afternoon and shadows grew longer, Clara felt a strange pride mixed with anxiety. She understood that she had become a symbol of change, a catalyst that had awakened emotions and desires that had lain dormant. The tribe might be divided, the elders might question, but Takoda's devotion remained unshaken, and that knowledge gave her courage. That night, as the desert wind whispered through the camp, Clara lay close to Takoda once more. She felt the eyes of the tribe in every shadow, but she no longer trembled. She had survived the judgment and seen the loyalty in the eyes of the man who had claimed her. She understood now that the path ahead would be difficult, fraught with opposition and scrutiny, but she was no longer simply a captive. She was a part of something larger, a force that neither tradition nor fear could easily undo. The desert sun sank low, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Clara sat near the edge of the camp, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. The wind carried the faint scent of sage and pine, and the last echoes of the day's activity drifted around her. She felt a heaviness in her chest that was not from fatigue, but from the thoughts swirling inside her. Takoda moved beside her silently. His presence was steady, a grounding force. She felt the warmth of his shoulder brush against hers, and the rhythm of his breathing like a quiet drum. Steady and sure, it was the first time she allowed herself to notice him not as a captor or as a chief, but as a man whose existence had begun to entwine with her own. The events of the past days replayed in her mind. The ambush that captured the Stormy. Night in the lodge, the way he had held her, the way his restraint had shattered. She could still feel the strength of his arms, the heat of his touch, the intensity of his gaze. All of it lingered in her body like fire, refusing to die down. Clara realized that she was frightened not of him but of herself. She had never considered the possibility of wanting a man so completely. The thought made her stomach tighten. Her heart raced at the memory of how he had looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. The truth of her feelings pressed against her like the weight of a coming storm. A messenger arrived from the tribe to inform them of an ambush nearby, yet Clara barely noticed the words. She was lost in the realization that she cared for Takoda more than she had dared to admit. Her thoughts kept returning to the moments when he had been vulnerable, when his strength had softened around her, when his devotion had become tangible. She had never felt so deeply seen or so utterly captive. Takoda glanced at her, sensing the shift in her demeanor. He did not speak at first, but allowed her to sit with her thoughts. He had faced enemies and warriors and dangers countless times, yet this quiet revelation of her heart was something foreign to him, something powerful and fragile. He wondered silently if she felt the same pull, that he could not deny the force that had claimed him from the first night. Finally Clara spoke, her voice low and trembling. "I cannot stop thinking of you," she whispered, "not as a captive, not as a guest, not as someone who owes loyalty, but as a woman who wants something she has never known." She had admitted the truth aloud and felt a strange liberation, even as fear fluttered in her chest. Takoda's eyes softened, the intensity giving way to a rare vulnerability. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with deliberate tenderness. His thumb traced the line of her cheek in a gesture that said more than words could hold. He leaned slightly closer and whispered through the translator that he too had felt the same. That desire and devotion had claimed him in ways he could not control. Clara's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and longing. She realized that love could be both terrifying and exhilarating, that the man who had captured her fate had also captured her heart. The desert around them seemed to hum in quiet approval, as if the wind itself acknowledged the union of their feelings. The night approached, bringing a chill to the air, yet inside Clara felt warmth that no fire could match. She knew that the path ahead would not be simple. The tribe was divided, the elders wary and the world beyond the mountains unpredictable, yet she no longer feared these challenges because she had confronted the truth of her heart and found it inextricably linked to Takoda's. The stars emerged one by one over the vast expanse of desert. Clara rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady pulse of life and strength in his chest. She understood that love was no gentle whisper. It was a force that demanded surrender, courage, and trust. And she had surrendered willingly, knowing that she would follow him through storms, dangers, and uncertainties. Because her heart had spoken, and her heart knew the truth. The moon rose full and pale over the desert, casting long silver shadows across the Apache camp. Clara walked slowly toward Takoda's lodge, her heart hammering in her chest. The evening air was cool, carrying scents of sage and dry earth and the distant sound of a coyote calling its mate. She hesitated at the hide flap, breathing deep before stepping inside, where Takoda waited silently. His eyes met hers immediately, a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty flickering in their depths. He did not rise or speak. He only watched the way her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the edge of the firelight. The lodge was quiet except for the soft crackle of embers dying in the hearth. Their faces glowed in the warm light, revealing every subtle expression, every hidden emotion. Clara could feel the weight of choice pressing against her chest. She had heard the whispers outside about the council, the elders, and the warriors questioning her presence. Yet in that moment the world narrowed to the space between them. She wanted to leave knowing the dangers she carried with her, but she also wanted to stay knowing the pull that had claimed her heart. Takoda rose slowly, his tall frame moving toward her with deliberate care, his hands lifted not to command but to offer an invitation. He reached for her fingers, brushing them against his own, and she felt a warmth like sunlight pouring into a cold canyon. His gaze held hers. Steady, unflinching, asking silently that she speak the truth of her desire, Clara swallowed hard, and finally whispered the words that had hovered on the edge of her lips, "I choose to stay." She said, not as a captive, not as a guest, but as a woman claiming her own fate. Her voice was low yet firm, carrying the certainty that had grown in her heart. She could see the relief flicker across his face, the tension in his jaw easing as if her words released a held breath. Takoda's eyes softened and a slow smile curved his lips, the first genuine smile she had seen since the night he had surrendered. To desire, the weight of years of discipline and restraint still lingered in his posture. Yet beneath it lay a fire that had been ignited by her courage and her honesty. He whispered through the translator that he would not survive losing her, that the thought of her leaving had been unbearable. The lodge seemed to shrink around them, the firelight wrapping them in a cocoon of warmth and quiet. The air hummed with unspoken promises and the steady rhythm of two hearts discovering the truth in one another. Clara felt the pulse of life that radiated from him and knew that their bond was more than mere attraction. It was recognition of souls that had collided in the vast emptiness of the desert. Outside, the council continued its debates, but inside they were untouched by whispers and judgment. The storm that raged in the world beyond the walls of the lodge did not matter here. Only the choices made in this space mattered, and Clara had made hers, Takoda had made his, and together they acknowledged that the path forward would be fraught with challenge, but also rich with a depth of shared hearts. Drew her closer, holding her as if to shield her from every fear, from every threat, from every doubt. The night air pressed against the hides and wood of the lodge, but it could not touch the warmth that radiated between them. He whispered that the tribe may question yet. His heart had made its choice, and he would stand unyielding in defense of it. Clara rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her ear. It spoke to her louder than words, louder than the desert wind, louder than any fear that had chased her through the days since her capture. She understood that love required courage and surrender, and she had given both willingly. The moonlight poured through the gaps in the lodge, illuminating their faces, and the firelight cast dancing shadows along the walls. In that quiet and sacred space, Clara and Takoda made their choice. Would face the world together, they would endure the judgments and the trials, and they would do so bound by the truth that neither fear nor tradition could undo. Their hearts had spoken, and they had answered fully without hesitation. The first light of dawn painted the desert in pale gold and pink. Clara stirred in the lodge, her body tense, her mind alert. The quiet of the night had been replaced by the sound of distant hoofbeats, heavy and deliberate. They grew louder, carrying the unmistakable rhythm of U.S. cavalry soldiers searching for her across the harsh terrain. She froze for a moment, caught between fear and resolve. Takoda stood beside her, tall and unwavering, his eyes scanning the horizon. The warriors around the camp tensed as well, their hands brushing the hilts of knives, the straps of bows, ready to defend their people. The presence of outsiders had always brought tension, yet this time it was different. He had made his choice, and the woman at his side was no longer merely a visitor, but a part of his life, a force he would not relinquish. The soldiers reached the edge of the camp, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. Their voices carried commands and questions. They demanded the return of Clara Witten, a white woman captured by the Apache. The camp held its breath, waiting for Takoda's response, knowing that any move could ignite a battle. The stakes higher than ever before, Clara stepped forward, her chin lifted, a new courage steadying her movements. She had survived ambush and desert storms. She had faced uncertainty and fear, and now she faced men who would not understand her choice. She spoke clearly to them, asserting that she was with the tribe willingly, that she had made her own decision, and that she would not leave. Their expressions shifted from expectation to shock, some anger, others disbelief. Takoda's gaze remained on her, a silent anchor giving strength to her words. His hands rested lightly on her shoulders, a gentle reassurance that he would not allow harm to come to her. He did not shout or threaten. Instead, he radiated calm authority, the kind that could bend the will of any who would oppose him. His warriors mirrored his composure, standing tall, ready to defend their chief and the woman he had claimed. The soldiers hesitated, their eyes moving between the resolve in Clara's stance and the determination etched into Takoda's face. They had not anticipated resistance from the woman herself, nor the unyielding loyalty of the chief. They exchanged quick words, their leader looking to assess whether confrontation was worth the cost. The desert around them held its breath, as if aware of the delicate balance on the edge of swords, and Decision Staka spoke through the translator. His voice low and unwavering, he stated that Clara was under his protection, that she had chosen to remain with the tribe, and that any act of aggression against her would be met with force. He did not flinch, he did not waver, and the soldiers sensed the power behind his calm authority. The camp behind him remained still, their trust in him absolute. Clara felt a strange pride swell in her chest. She had claimed her own fate, she had faced the soldiers and spoken the truth of her heart. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She looked up at Takoda, seeing his eyes dark and steady, filled with pride and devotion, and she understood that they were bound together, not by circumstance alone, but by mutual respect and love. The soldiers slowly withdrew their demands, some muttering under their breath, some glaring yet unable to break the resolve that surrounded Clara and Takoda. The tension lingered in the desert air, but the immediate threat past the tribe exhaled collectively, relief mingling with lingering caution. The message was clear that the chief would not yield his woman, and that she would not abandon her choice. As the sun climbed higher, the camp returned to its rhythm, yet a new awareness settled over the people. They had witnessed courage and devotion, a woman claiming her own destiny, a chief standing unyielding in love and protection. The desert wind carried whispers of respect and awe through the camp, and Clara felt a bond with Takoda that had deepened beyond words. That night, Clara lay close to him, the desert stars piercing the sky above. They were safe for now, yet she knew the path ahead would be filled with challenges. The world beyond the mountains might not understand their union, but she no longer feared it. She had faced the storm at the gates and survived. She had chosen her heart and her chief, and the strength of their connection promised that nothing could undo what they had decided together. Desert sun sank low behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep orange and violet. Clara walked beside Takoda through the camp, feeling the heat of the day fade into the cool embrace of evening. The warriors and elders watched them closely, their expressions a mixture of respect, curiosity, and unease. The events of recent days had unsettled the tribe, yet Takoda's presence anchored them all with undeniable authority. News had reached the camp of soldiers still searching beyond the desert ridges. Their persistence threatened safety, yet Takoda did not waver. He had made a choice, and no force could compel him to relinquish the woman who had captured his heart. Clara felt the weight of his determination radiate from him like the steady pulse of a drum. She knew that his decision was absolute, that he would not allow fear or expectation to guide him away from what he had claimed. Takoda approached the edge of the camp where the elders gathered. Their faces held tension lines deepened by the weight of leadership and tradition. They whispered among themselves, debating whether the chief's insistence on keeping Clara threatened their stability or honored his right as a leader to follow his heart. Yet when Takoda stood before them tall and unyielding, there was no doubt that he would not bend. Clara watched him silently, feeling pride and awe. His dark eyes held fire tempered by love and respect. The strength of his conviction was impossible to ignore. The elders fell silent one by one, sensing the force of will behind the chief who had chosen love over fear, who had embraced desire without compromising honor. The young warriors around the camp shifted uneasily. Some still questioned the presence of a white woman among them, yet even they could see that Takoda's stance was unshakable. His hands rested lightly on the hilts of his weapons, a gesture of readiness but also of restraint. He would defend what he had claimed not with reckless fury, but with controlled and absolute determination. Clara stepped forward. Her voice steady yet soft, she spoke to the elders and warriors, explaining that she had chosen to stay with the tribe willingly, that she had seen the strength and honor in Takoda and had found in him a protector and partner. She spoke of trust and courage and the bond that had grown between them. Their faces turned toward her, some skeptical, yet most attentive, as the truth of her words settled into the air. Takoda placed his hand gently on her shoulder, the smallest touch carrying immense reassurance. He spoke through the translator, reminding all present that Clara was not a captive, but a woman who had exercised her own will. He added that any act of force against her would be an act against him, and that he would meet such aggression with unwavering resistance. The tension in the camp began to shift slowly, respect edging out doubt. Elders recognized the strength of the chief who chose devotion over convenience, the bravery of a woman who claimed her own destiny, and the unbreakable bond that now linked them. Neither fear nor tradition could undo what had been chosen freely and fully. Outside the camp, the desert wind carried the distant sounds of movement, the hum of life in a world still dangerous and unpredictable. Yet within the walls of the lodge and around the fire, Clara felt a sense of safety she had never known. Her heart beat in rhythm with Takoda's, and she understood that their unity was more powerful than any threat, more enduring than any fear. As the night descended, stars piercing the dark sky above the tribe settled into quiet observance. Clara rested against Takoda, feeling the strength of his arms around her and the certainty of his protection. She realized that love could be as commanding as leadership, as resolute as any vow, and that Takoda had embodied that truth for her, for the tribe, and for himself. In that still desert night, she understood the depth of his choice and the magnitude of hers. Together they had faced the world and emerged unshaken. They had proven that a chief who follows his heart can inspire not just loyalty but understanding, and that a woman who speaks her truth can shape the destiny of those around her. Their story was no longer private, it was a testament to courage, devotion, and the power of love, unyielding and complete. The first light of dawn stretched across the desert, painting the mountains in soft shades of gold and rose. Clara stood beside Takoda outside his lodge, feeling the cool breeze brush her face, and the warmth of the fire from the previous night still lingering in her chest. She looked out over the camp where warriors and elders moved with quiet purpose. The tension of past days had begun to settle, yet a new awareness lingered in every tensuna. Gaze. Takoda's hand found hers and held it gently but firmly. His eyes met hers with a mixture of devotion, pride, and unspoken promise. She felt the steady beat of his heart through their linked fingers and knew that she had chosen well, that their bond was not only desire but trust, courage, and mutual respect. It was a love forged in fire and trial, tested against fear and doubt, and it had endured. The tribe gathered around the lodge, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, respect, and tentative acceptance. Clara sensed that some still questioned the presence of a white woman, yet the force of Takoda's choice and the clarity of her own words had begun to shift hearts. Even the elders who had whispered doubts now watched silently, acknowledging that the chief's will and her courage could not be denied. Takoda stepped forward, raising his hand slightly to call attention. Warriors stilled their movements and the air seemed to hold its breath. He spoke through the translator, his voice calm, unwavering. He declared that Clara was his chosen companion, that she had made her own choice to stay, and that their bond would be honored by all in the tribe. His words carried weight that left no room for dissent. Clara stood beside him, her heart swelling with emotion. She felt the eyes of the people around them, the quiet respect forming like a slow tide. She understood that her presence was no longer a source of division, but a symbol of something greater, the meeting of two worlds. Two hearts crossing boundaries with courage and love had changed the course of their lives, and subtly the lives of those around them. The ceremony began as the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the camp. Takoda and Clara stood together. Near the center, the elders forming a circle around them. The wind carried the scent of desert sage, and the soft rustle of movement filled the space with life. The chief offered a silent prayer of gratitude and protection for the woman who had captured his heart and for the strength that had allowed her to claim her destiny. Clara spoke her own words aloud, her voice steady and clear. She declared her commitment to Takoda, her choice to stand beside him in love and partnership. Her eyes met his, and the unspoken promises passed between them, their hearts beating in rhythm stronger than any drum, stronger than any oath. They were no longer captive and chief. They were equals bound by choice and devotion. The warriors and elders watched quietly. Then one by one they stepped forward, placing small offerings of respect at their feet. The camp seemed to exhale as if the desert itself recognized the union and blessed it. The children played nearby, laughter spilling across the sand, and the women smiled softly, acknowledging the courage and heart that had made this day possible. As the ceremony concluded, Takoda guided Clara to the edge of the lodge and held her close. The sun's first true rays illuminated their faces, revealing joy, love, and resolve. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast, untamed world, yet they faced it together, united in heart, spirit, and purpose. Clara rested her head against Takoda's chest, feeling the steady warmth of life and protection, and she knew that they had created something stronger than fear, stronger than tradition. And in that quiet desert morning, surrounded by the tribe and the wide expanse of the untamed West, Clara understood fully that her fate was no longer determined by circumstance or danger. It was chosen by love. It was shared by a man who had surrendered to desire and devotion, and it was a new dawn for them, both a life of freedom, passion, and unyielding connection, stretching forward like the endless horizon of the West.